The grandfather clock in the east wing of Valdoria Palace struck midnight as Princess Elena stood by the tall windows, watching the rain cascade down the ancient glass. Her reflection looked back at her, pale and exhausted, dark circles under her eyes telling the story of sleepless nights that had stretched into weeks. The weight of the crown jewels she had worn earlier that evening at the state dinner felt nothing compared to the burden she now carried in her heart. Prince Alexander entered the room quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick Persian carpet that had been a wedding gift from the Sultan of Zahara 3 years ago. Their marriage had been celebrated across the kingdom of Valdoria, a fairy tale union between childhood sweethearts who had grown up in neighboring royal families. The press had called them the Golden Couple, the hope for a new generation of modern monarchy. Elena. Alexander's voice was soft, almost hesitant. He had removed his formal dinner jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt. Even in the dim light of the room, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself as if preparing for battle. She turned from the window, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, across the room that had witnessed so many of their private moments. This was where they had planned their wedding, where they had discussed their dreams for the kingdom, where they had held each other through the difficult early days of their reign when Alexander's father had abdicated unexpectedly due to illness. "The doctor called an hour ago," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. The test results came back. Alexander's face went pale. They had been trying to have children for 2 years, and each failed attempt had been scrutinized by the press, analyzed by royal watchers, and whispered about in the corridors of power. The succession laws of Valdoria required a direct heir, and the pressure from the parliament, the church, and the people had been mounting steadily. What did he say? Alexander moved closer, his hands reaching for hers. Elena looked down at their intertwined fingers, remembering their wedding day when these same hands had exchanged rings in the ancient cathedral while thousands cheered outside. Serious ones. The chances of us ever having children naturally are, she paused, the words catching in her throat, practically non-existent. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the storm continued to rage, matching the turmoil in their hearts. Alexander sank into the velvet armchair beside the fireplace, his head in his hands. The weight of generations of royal tradition, the expectations of an entire nation, and the future of their dynasty crashed down upon them both. "We have to tell them," Elena said, moving to sit on the arm of his chair. "The Prime Minister, the Archbishop, the people. We can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not." Alexander looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "If we announce this, Elena, you know what will happen. The Parliament will start discussing succession alternatives. They'll pressure me to consider other options." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. In Valdoria's history, there had been precedents. Kings who had set aside wives who couldn't produce heirs. Queens who had stepped down for the good of the realm. The very thought made Elena's stomach turn, but she knew they couldn't ignore the reality of their situation. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," Elena admitted. "Ever since we started suspecting, I've been researching our options, talking to constitutional experts in private. There might be ways to change the succession laws, to consider adoption, or we face the possibility that our reign might be the last of the direct bloodline," Alexander finished for her. He stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a folder that had been hidden beneath official state papers. "I've been doing research too. There are precedents in other monarchies, ways to modernize without abandoning tradition entirely." Elena joined him at the desk, looking at the documents he had compiled. Marriage law, succession protocols, constitutional amendments. It was clear that Alexander had been thinking about this just as seriously as she had. The depth of his preparation both comforted and frightened her. "If we do this, if we make this public, there's no going back," she said, her finger tracing the edge of one of the documents. "Our marriage will be scrutinized like never before. Every decision we make will be questioned." Alexander turned to face her fully, taking her face in his hands. "Elena, I married you because I love you, not because of what you could give the kingdom. If we have to fight for our right to rule together, if we have to change centuries of tradition, then that's what we'll do, but we'll do it together." The rain continued to pound against the windows as they held each other, Two people carrying the weight of a crown and the hopes of a nation. In that moment, Princess Elena realized that their greatest test as rulers wasn't going to be managing the economy or navigating international relations. It was going to be fighting for their love and their right to define what a modern monarchy could look like. As the clock struck 1 in the morning, they began to plan. Tomorrow, they would start the process of changing everything their kingdom had known about royal succession. Tomorrow, they would begin the fight for their future, knowing that failure meant not just the end of their reign, but possibly the end of the monarchy itself. The storm outside began to subside, but the storm brewing in the palace was just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of the royal breakfast room as Princess Elena pushed eggs around her plate, her appetite having vanished entirely. Across from her, Prince Alexander read through the morning papers with a grim expression, each headline seemingly worse than the last. The royal press secretary had been fielding calls since dawn, all asking the same questions about the royal couple's plans for children and the future of the succession. "Your Majesties," Lord Pemberton, the king's private secretary, entered with a silver tray bearing the day's official correspondence. His usually composed demeanor showed cracks of concern. "The Prime Minister has requested an urgent audience at 10 o'clock. The Archbishop has also called, expressing his desire to meet this afternoon." Elena and Alexander exchanged glances. Word was already spreading through the corridors of power, even though they had told no one except Elena's doctor about their situation. The network of palace staff, government officials, and church leaders had an uncanny ability to sense when something significant was happening within the royal family. "Schedule them both," Alexander said, folding his newspaper. "And Lord Pemberton, I want you to arrange a meeting with the constitutional law experts we discussed last month, discreetly." "Of course, Your Majesty." Pemberton hesitated for a moment. "Might I also suggest that we begin preparing a statement for the press? The speculation is becoming quite intense, and the palace switchboard is overwhelmed with calls from journalists." Elena set down her fork, her hands trembling slightly. "What are they saying?" "The usual rumors, Your Highness. Questions about your health, speculation about marital problems, theories about secret pregnancies. The gossip magazines are already preparing special editions. The weight of living under constant scrutiny had never felt heavier." Elena thought about the young woman she had been before marriage, able to walk through London streets without bodyguards, able to have private conversations without worrying about eavesdropping servants, able to visit doctors without the entire kingdom analyzing every detail. Alexander reached across the table and took her hand. "We knew this day would come eventually. The question is whether we control the narrative or let others control it for us." Their moment of private connection was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Queen Mother Beatrice entered, her elegant figure draped in a morning gown of deep purple. At 72, she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had navigated royal crises for decades, having supported her late husband through 3 major constitutional challenges during their reign. "My dears," she said, settling into the chair at the head of the table that had been hers for 40 years, "I think it's time we had a frank discussion about what's really happening here." Elena felt her cheeks burn. The Queen Mother had an uncanny ability to see through any pretense, a skill honed by decades of reading people and situations. There was no point in trying to hide their struggles from someone who had faced similar challenges in her own marriage. "Grandmother," Alexander began. But the older woman raised her hand gently. "I've lived through enough royal crises to recognize the signs, Alexander. The midnight meetings with doctors, the constitutional law books in your study, the way Elena has been avoiding public appearances. I'm not here to judge or to pressure you. I'm here because I love you both and because I understand what you're facing." Elena looked at the woman who had become like a mother to her, someone who had guided her through the complex world of royal protocol and expectations. "It's not what everyone thinks." "We're not having marital problems, and I'm not ill in the way the papers are suggesting. It's just, we can't have children. Not naturally." The Queen Mother nodded slowly, her expression showing no surprise. "I suspected as much. The question now is what you plan to do about it." "We want to fight," Alexander said firmly. "We want to explore options for changing the succession laws, for modernizing the monarchy while respecting its traditions. But we know it won't be easy. This is easy." The Queen Mother smiled sadly. My dear boy, nothing about being a monarch is easy, but sometimes the most difficult decisions are the ones that define a reign. Your great-grandfather faced similar challenges when he chose to modernize the military. Your grandfather revolutionized the relationship between the crown and parliament. Perhaps it's your turn to revolutionize how we think about family and succession. Elena felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. Do you really think it's possible? Can we change centuries of tradition without destroying the institution itself? The monarchy has survived because it has adapted, the Queen Mother replied. Those who refused to change were swept away by history. Those who embraced change while honoring the past created legacies that lasted generations. Their conversation was interrupted by another knock. This time, it was the Prime Minister's secretary, announcing that the PM had arrived early for his meeting. As they prepared to face the first of what would be many difficult conversations, Elena realized that their private struggle was about to become very public. The Queen Mother rose from her chair and moved to embrace them both. Remember, you are not just husband and wife facing a personal challenge. You are king and queen facing a constitutional moment. Handle this with the wisdom and grace that brought you to the throne, and the kingdom will follow your lead. As Elena and Alexander prepared to meet with the Prime Minister, they knew that the next few hours would determine not just their personal future, but the future of the monarchy itself. The real test of their reign was about to begin, and there would be no practice runs or dress rehearsals. The weight of the crown had never felt more real or more fragile. The oak-paneled walls of the king's private study seemed to close in around them as Prime Minister Margaret Thornfield spread constitutional documents across the massive mahogany desk. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in its characteristic tight bun, and her sharp blue eyes moved between the royal couple and the papers with calculated precision. She had served 3 monarchs in her political career and was known for her ability to navigate the most treacherous waters of constitutional law. Your Majesties, she began, her voice carrying the weight of decades in politics, what you're proposing would require not just parliamentary approval, but constitutional amendments that haven't been attempted since the Great Reform of 1832. The legal implications are staggering. Prince Alexander leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together. Prime Minister, we're not asking you to make this easy. We're asking you to help us explore what's possible. The monarchy must evolve, or it risks becoming irrelevant to the people we serve. Elena watched the Prime Minister's expression carefully. Margaret Thornfield was known for her pragmatic approach to governance, but she was also acutely aware of political realities. Any constitutional change would need to pass through Parliament, where opposition parties would seize any opportunity to challenge the monarchy's relevance. The political challenges are significant, Thornfield continued, pulling out a folder marked with the red seal of confidential government documents. I've had my legal team conduct a preliminary review. Changing succession laws would require approval from not just our parliament, but potentially from the Commonwealth realms as well. We're talking about a process that could take years we don't have, Elena said quietly. The press speculation is already becoming unbearable. Our legitimacy is being questioned daily. Every public appearance becomes an opportunity for journalists to analyze my figure, my behavior, looking for signs of pregnancy that will never come. Despite her reputation for political calculation, she was not without compassion for the human cost of public life. Your Highness, I understand the personal toll this is taking, but we must consider the broader implications. If we announce that you cannot have children before we have a clear path forward, it could destabilize not just the monarchy, but the government itself. Alexander stood and moved to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where tourists gathered daily hoping for a glimpse of royal life. What if we don't have a choice? What if the truth comes out anyway? Wouldn't it be better to control the announcement rather than have it leaked by palace staff or medical personnel? The truth has a way of emerging regardless of our plans, Thornfield admitted. I've already had inquiries from several newspapers claiming to have sources close to the palace. We may have days rather than weeks before this becomes public knowledge. Elena felt her heart racing. The idea that their most private struggle might be exposed by tabloid journalists was almost unbearable. What are our realistic options, Prime Minister? If we move quickly, what could we actually accomplish? Thornfield opened another folder, this one containing international precedents and legal analyses. Sweden modified their succession laws in 1980 to allow the firstborn child, regardless of gender, to inherit. Belgium changed their laws in 1991. The Netherlands has provisions for adoption within the royal family. These precedents suggest that change is possible, but they all had one advantage we don't have, which is... Alexander turned from the window, his face etched with concern. Time. Each of these changes was made gradually, with years of public preparation and political maneuvering. What you're asking for would need to happen under intense public scrutiny, with opposition parties ready to exploit any perceived weakness. The room fell silent as the weight of their situation settled upon them. Elena thought about the crowds that had cheered at their wedding, the children who had waved flags during their public appearances, the hope in people's faces when they spoke about the future of the monarchy. How would those same people react when they learned the truth? There is one option we haven't discussed, Thornfield said carefully, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. It's unconventional, and it would require enormous political courage from all of us. What is it? Elena asked, though part of her feared the answer. We could announce the situation proactively, frame it as an opportunity for modernization rather than a crisis. Present the constitutional changes as a way to strengthen the monarchy for the 21st century, not as a desperate response to personal circumstances. Alexander returned to his seat, considering the Prime Minister's words. A bold move rather than a defensive one, but it would require perfect timing, flawless communication, and unanimous support from the government. One misstep, one leaked detail, one opposition politician calling this a constitutional crisis, and the entire plan could collapse. Elena realized they were discussing not just their personal future, but the survival of an institution that had guided their nation for over 1,000 years. The responsibility was overwhelming, but there was also something liberating about finally confronting the challenge head-on. How long do we have to make this decision? She asked. Based on my sources in the media, I estimate we have perhaps 72 hours before someone publishes a story. After that, we'll be responding to events rather than controlling them. As the Prime Minister gathered her papers and prepared to leave, Elena and Alexander sat in the study that had witnessed countless royal decisions throughout history. They had 3 days to decide whether to gamble everything on a bold political maneuver or to let events unfold beyond their control. The weight of the crown had never felt more precarious. But for the first time since their crisis began, they had a plan that offered hope for both their marriage and their kingdom. The next 72 hours would determine everything. The emergency session of the Privy Council convened at 7 in the morning, an hour before the palace staff would normally arrive for duty. The ancient chamber, with its portraits of past monarchs gazing down from gilt frames, had seen constitutional crises before, but none quite like this. Archbishop William sat across from the Attorney General, while the Speaker of the House of Commons reviewed legal documents that had been prepared throughout the night. Princess Elena stood before the assembled councillors, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she was about to say. Prince Alexander remained beside her, a united front in the face of the most significant challenge of their reign. My lords and ladies of the council, Elena began. We have asked you here today because the Crown faces a situation that requires both constitutional guidance and political support. As you know, the succession of the monarchy has been a matter of public speculation for some time. Archbishop Williams leaned forward, his weathered face showing deep concern. Your Majesty, before you continue, I must express the Church's hope that whatever challenges you face, they can be resolved within the framework of our traditional understanding of marriage and royal duty. Archbishop, Alexander interjected. What we're about to share with you will require the Church to consider how tradition can embrace modern realities while maintaining its core principles. The Attorney General, Sir Robert Blackwood, had been taking careful notes. As the Crown's chief legal advisor, he had spent the previous night reviewing centuries of precedent and constitutional law. Your Majesties, I believe I understand the nature of this meeting. Are we discussing alternatives to natural succession? Elena took a deep breath, knowing that the words she spoke next would change everything. We are announcing that the Queen cannot bear children. This is not a temporary condition or a matter of timing. It is a permanent medical reality that affects the direct succession of the Crown. The silence that followed was profound. Several counselors exchanged glances, while others stared at documents as if hoping to find answers in the legal text. The weight of history seemed to press down upon the room. Furthermore, Alexander continued, we are proposing constitutional amendments that would allow for adoption within the royal family to be considered equivalent to natural birth for purposes of succession. We are also proposing that the spouse of the monarch be granted equal standing in matters of royal adoption. Archbishop Williams slowly removed his reading glasses, his expression troubled. Your Majesties, what you're proposing would require not just legal changes, but a fundamental re-examination of how we understand royal bloodlines and divine appointment. With respect, Archbishop, Elena replied, perhaps it's time for such a re-examination. The monarchy has always evolved to serve the people. Today's people understand that family can be created through love and choice, not just through biology. Sir Robert had been scribbling notes furiously. The legal mechanisms exist for what you're proposing, but the political process would be unprecedented. We would need parliamentary supermajorities, constitutional conventions, and likely referendum approval from the people. The Speaker of the House, Patricia Henley, had remained silent until now. As the representative of Parliament in this discussion, her support would be crucial. Your Majesties, I must ask the difficult question. Have you considered that the simplest solution might be for you to step aside in favor of your cousin Prince Edward and his family? He has 3 children. The succession would be secure, and the constitutional crisis could be avoided entirely. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Elena felt Alexander tense beside her, and she knew that this moment would define not just their response to the crisis, but their entire understanding of what it meant to serve as monarchs. Madam Speaker, Elena said quietly, we became king and queen not just because of bloodline, but because we were prepared to serve the people with everything we had to offer. Our inability to have biological children doesn't diminish our commitment to the crown or our capacity to lead. Moreover, Alexander added, if we establish the precedent that monarchs who cannot produce heirs should simply step aside, we create a dangerous expectation for future generations. What happens to the crown when medical challenges arise? Do we treat the monarchy as disposable based on biological function? Archbishop Williams stood and walked to one of the tall windows, his clerical robes rustling against the ancient floorboards. When he turned back to face them, his expression had changed. Perhaps there is wisdom in what you propose. The Church has always taught that children are a blessing, but we have also taught that there are many ways to create a family. If adoption can create loving families for ordinary citizens, why should it be considered lesser for royal families? The Attorney General looked up from his notes. If we move forward with this, the timeline becomes critical. The constitutional process could take 18 months. During that time, every decision you make will be scrutinized, every public appearance analyzed, every policy initiative questioned. We understand the risks, Elena replied. But we also understand that leadership sometimes requires taking unprecedented action for the greater good. The Speaker stood, her expression thoughtful. Your Majesties, you're asking Parliament to bet the future of the monarchy on an untested constitutional theory, but you're also offering us the chance to modernize an ancient institution in a way that reflects contemporary values. As the meeting continued into the morning, Elena realized they were not just discussing legal procedures and political strategies. They were defining what kind of monarchy they wanted to lead, what kind of example they wanted to set for the people they served. The old rules had been clear and simple. The new rules they were creating would be complex and challenging, but they would also be more inclusive, more adaptable, and more reflective of the diverse families that made up their kingdom. Whether they succeeded or failed, they would do so as partners, facing the future together with courage and conviction. Part 5. The great ballroom of Valdoria Palace had been transformed into a press conference venue, with cameras from news organizations around the world focused on the podium where Princess Elena and Prince Alexander would make their historic announcement. Behind the scenes, palace staff had worked through the night to prepare for what would be the most significant royal statement in decades. Elena stood before her dressing room mirror, adjusting the sapphire brooch that had belonged to Alexander's grandmother. Her hands were steady now, the nervousness of the past weeks replaced by a calm determination. The decision had been made. The legal framework had been prepared, and the support of key political and religious leaders had been secured. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Alexander entered looking distinguished in his formal morning dress, the weight of kingship evident in his bearing but not overwhelming his natural warmth. "The Prime Minister says the international press response has been positive so far," he said, moving to stand beside her at the mirror. "The Commonwealth representatives had indicated their support for our approach." Elena turned to face him, seeing not just her husband but her partner in this unprecedented journey. "Are you ready for this? Once we step out there, there's no going back to the way things were." "The way things were wasn't working," Alexander replied, taking her hands in his. "We were letting other people define our marriage, our reign, and our future. Today, we take control of our own story." Lord Pemberton appeared in the doorway, his usually calm demeanor showing signs of the stress that had consumed the palace staff for weeks. "Your Majesties, the press room is full. Parliamentary leaders have taken their seats and the Archbishop is ready to make his supporting statement afterward." As they walked through the corridors toward the ballroom, Elena thought about all the royal couples who had walked these same halls, facing their own challenges and crises. Some had been remembered for their triumphs, others for their failures, but all had been shaped by the decisions they made in moments of testing. The doors to the ballroom opened, and the flash of cameras illuminated their path to the podium. The crowd of journalists, government officials, and palace staff rose as they entered, the weight of their expectation palpable in the room. Alexander stepped forward first, his voice carrying clearly through the ornate space. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. The Queen and I have asked you here to share news that affects both our personal lives and the constitutional future of our kingdom." Elena moved to the microphone, her prepared statement forgotten as she chose instead to speak from her heart. "For the past several months, Prince Alexander and I have been facing a personal challenge that has required us to think deeply about what it means to be a royal family in the modern world. Today we want to share with you that medical circumstances mean we will not be able to have biological children." The room was completely silent, the gravity of the announcement settling over everyone present. Elena continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "This news has led us to examine not just our personal future, but the future of the monarchy itself. We believe that families are created through love, commitment, and choice, not just through biology. With the support of Parliament, the Church, and the Commonwealth, we are announcing constitutional amendments that will allow adoption to be considered equivalent to birth for purposes of royal succession. These changes represent not a weakening of tradition, but a strengthening of the values that the monarchy has always represented: service, commitment, and the belief that family bonds are created through love and dedication." The questions from the press came quickly, but Elena and Alexander had prepared for this moment. They spoke about the legal process, the timeline for implementation, and their hopes for the future with confidence and clarity. As the formal press conference concluded, and they moved to private meetings with international representatives, Elena realized that they had accomplished something remarkable. They had transformed a personal crisis into an opportunity for institutional growth, a private struggle into a public example of resilience and adaptation. Later that evening, as they returned to their private apartments, the same rooms where their journey had begun weeks earlier, they found messages of support from ordinary citizens around the kingdom, letters from adoptive families, couples facing infertility, and people who simply admired their courage to challenge tradition while honoring its best elements. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Elena asked as they sat together by the fireplace, the day's formal clothes replaced by comfortable evening wear. Alexander pulled her closer, looking at the photographs on the mantelpiece that chronicled their life together. Their childhood friendship, their courtship, their wedding, their early days as king and queen. "I think we did the only thing we could do and still remain true to ourselves and to the people we serve." Outside, the storm clouds that had gathered during their crisis had finally cleared, revealing a sky full of stars. The future remained uncertain, full of challenges and opportunities that they couldn't yet imagine. But they would face whatever came next together, as partners in marriage and in service to their kingdom. Their reign would be remembered not for the children they couldn't have, but for the new definition of royal family they had helped to create. In choosing love over tradition, adaptation over rigidity, They had shown that even the most ancient institutions could embrace change without losing their essential character. The crown they wore together was stronger for having been tested, and the kingdom they served was more inclusive, for having been led by rulers who understood that true strength comes not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them with courage, wisdom, and love.